Good morning.
Good morning.
I am glad to be with you today. I remember back in the olden days, Ari Brower was the head of the World Council of Churches, and he got up at a conference to give a speech, and he said, "I'd like to say a few words before I speak." And so I thought I would say a few words before I speak. And the funny thing about Ari Brower is he did not realize that he had said anything funny. So it's just the way they were back in the day. I'm young enough to remember what it used to be like. My name is Steve Young, and there was a football player named after me. About 7 years after me, I think. Something like that. 8 years? I don't know. And I teach at McHenry County College. I need to correct what I said to Alan. I think Alan is right in that he was a year ahead of me. I think I was actually graduated in 1981, but then I had to do another year before my ordination. And so when I came to McHenry County College, one of the first opportunities I had in the community was right after 9/11, I was asked to meet at the Woodstock Congregational Church, some of you may remember. And we had a good evening, and I talked with, Patrick was there, I think, that evening, and we talked about the contribution that Unitarian Universalists can make to the kind of world post 9/11. It was a very important day for me as someone who on 8/11 left the state of New Jersey to move to Illinois. Enough said. Now I'll begin to speak. Let's start with Scripture. I have 2 lessons. The first lesson is from the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis, and I'm reading from the Contemporary Jewish Publication Society translation. This is the story of the Tower and City of Babel. Everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them hard." Brick served as stone, and bitumen served as mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the sky, to make a name for ourselves. Else we shall be scattered all over the world." The Lord came down to look at the city and the tower that humanity had built. And the Lord said, "If, as one people with one language for all, this is how they've begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Let us then go down and confound their speech there, so that they shall not understand one another's speech." Thus, the Lord scattered them from there over the face of the whole world, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confounded the speech of the whole earth. And from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole world. Our second scripture lesson is from the Tao Te Ching, the 8th chapter, which describes how the Tao, the path or the way, is like water. The highest good is like water. Water so deft, so good at benefiting things by never competing with them, by putting itself where none want to go. That is why it is so close to the path. Indwelling, so good at finding place. In centering, so good at finding the depths. In interacting, so good at being kind. In babbling, you knew there'd be a connection, right? In babbling, so good at ringing true. In aligning, so good at shaping up. When put to work, so good at gaining the power. When making a move, so good at finding the moment. Because never contending, ever beyond reproach. These words are scripture. We give thanks. I use Post-it notes for my sermons. Just so I know what I'm going to say if I keep them in order. How long is this sermon supposed to be? Okay, I thought we would consider the moment that we're in, and I'd like to relate that moment to what the book of Genesis calls sort of the beginning of the world. That is, the world before God picks out the Jews as God's chosen people. And another moment that our moment is like is the moment of the Warring States period in ancient China, the end of the Zhou dynasty, before Emperor Qin unites ancient China into the nation that would become the nation we refer to as China. And so in both cases, we're looking at texts that come into being about 24 to 2,600 years ago. About the same time, this ancient Jewish text and this ancient Taoist text. And so what I'd like to talk about is a couple of words you may have heard of. One word is slime. Everybody heard of slime? Seen Ghostbusters, you know all that, right? And the second word is Babel. And depends on how you spell it, but according to this, it's got 2 B's, but the translation I read from the Tao Te Ching, talking about babbling, has 3 B's in it. But I think there's a connection between slime and Babel. Babel is just confused speech. Babel is speech that is not understood. right? If somebody just babbles on, first off, you don't pay attention. And second off, there's a reason you don't pay attention, because you don't know what the person is talking about. You can't understand them. This is one of my favorite experiences is when my wife and I, after Christmas, we take a trip. And so the last trip we took was to Munich, Germany. And well, let's just say I decided afterwards to start taking German. So I'm in German 101 this semester at school. So it just sounded like a lot of babble to me, the confused speech. Okay? So babble is this like lack of understanding. And there's an old story about that, how in ancient Babylon, the story of Babylon. First off, Babylon is one of those ancient empires in early civilization. In the Mesopotamian River Valley, the Bible here says the field of Shinar, right? So, ancient Babylon is an empire. Ancient Babylon, the Babylonian leaders decided to build a city because they had this new technology. And with this new technology, they could make a monument to the empire's greatness, which we know of today as stepped pyramids called ziggurats, in which the priests would climb up the steps and go and invoke the great Babylonian gods like Marduk. And then have a connection between heaven and earth. The problem was, at least as the Bible tells it, the problem was that with that technology, baking bricks and boiling bitumen to use as an asphalt, to use as a tar, to build these great temples, they required everybody to be able to communicate with one another. And so the Babylonian language was the language that was supposed to be imposed on all the people of the earth, or at least that large hunk of the earth called the Babylonian Empire. The divine being looked down on the earth and said, if these people are able to impose their technology on the world, there will be nothing to stop them from getting their way. There will be nothing to stop them from getting their way. And in this story, I saw some connections to our world today. Technological innovations that will allow, well, I had the good fortune of being in McHenry yesterday for the No Kings protest, and first person I saw that I recognized was helping people cross the street, and his name is Alan Shearer. And, he said, I'll see you tomorrow, and that reminded me to show up today. So I went to my phone, following some advice, and turned off everything so that ICE couldn't figure out who I was. I don't know. That's what they say, that there are now mobile tracking technologies to see where your phone is and see who and see what's going on around C. I mean, you know, tap into, right? And I sort of feel the power of that story. If this technology is available to them, there will be nothing that they cannot accomplish. That technology from ancient Babylon was seen as a threat to the divine diversity that the God of ancient Judah felt was necessary for the well-being of that God's people. The confusion of languages, is part of the divine design, so that there is no unity, there's no conformity, there's no taking and the power of consolidation of the earth under one regime. Let's move then from ancient Mesopotamia to ancient China. The story about water in the 8th chapter of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching is this ancient Taoist text. Taoism is this notion that the Tao, a word that means the path or the way or the course of things, the Tao of the natural world, the Tao of an ordered society, the Tao of the way reality is. That is, just the way things actually go through the process of being. And being is not a static thing, but being is always becoming and transforming. The highest skill, the highest good, the greatest way of being, said the Tao Te Ching, is like water. And when I first read this passage a long time ago, actually, the thing that stuck with me was where it says, water never competes, but it always gets its way. Its way is just going wherever it goes. And where does it go? It goes right down to those places that most of us try and avoid. And the image that has always stuck in my mind is water doesn't avoid becoming slimy. The icky parts, you know, you go out and you see the wonderful lakes, but there's some corner that stays wet, but it doesn't get it circulated, and all the gook and the icky and the slimy and the nasty is right there. Water doesn't mind. It has no agenda. It has no plans. It has no program to be followed. It just goes, as they say, with the flow. The highest good, the greatest skillfulness is like water. Now that was a challenging message in the Warring States period, because the Warring States period was a period in ancient Chinese history that was a lot like the kind of division and mistrust, but with roving armies going wherever they could. There's about 50 ancient duchies and sort of competing emperors and imperial regions by which China was divided into all these little regional power centers. And the period was a period of about 300 years before China was then unified under the Emperor Qin, the one who had the terracotta warriors that you may have seen at the Field Museum or someplace like that. So it was a divided period of time. It was a time of social violence and control and the battles for supremacy among the competing emperor wannabes. I was reminded of this a few months ago when I got another translation of the Tao Te Ching. It's sort of like I've got all these Bibles at home, and I've got all these Tao Te Chings too. And the latest one is by a professor, Brooke Zipperin, who teaches at the University of Chicago, and his translation stresses the kind of anti-Confucianism of the Tao Te Ching. Confucius being the great Chinese sage about how to order society and how everybody needs to practice being the kind of person that fits in to the social needs of social order, right? Confucius' answer to the warring states period was, we need social order. We need everybody to cooperate. We need everybody to follow these kinds of rules of etiquette and behavior. And the Tao Te Ching becomes a text of the Taoists, those who see the way of nature as more compelling than the way of rigid order. And so Zipporin's translation uses the terminology of the ancient thought of Confucius, but shows the slipperiness, the sliminess of the terminology. And whereas the traditional translation of the Tao Te Ching from the sacred books of the East says, the excellence of words is their trustworthiness. That sounds kind of mundane to me. But then when I read Zipporin's translation, where he said, the excellence of babbling is good at ringing true. Ringing true not as like a logical confirmation of factualness, but babbling as the wordiness that itself is not really clear, but gives us insight to the truth, leads us to an awareness that it rings true, right? So we're not talking about the rigidness of logic, but the way words are never really totally clear, but somehow lead us to insight, somehow lead us to the sense that we're committed to this. I think that's a lot like the insight of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who just happened to be a Unitarian. Anybody heard of Ralph Waldo Emerson? It's one of the simple gifts in the watercolor by, what is it, P.D. Gordon? B.S. Gordon, right? The Bible, and then on top of the Bible is Emerson's book. And then on top of Emerson's speeches is the book that doesn't have a title, because there's a lot of things that bring divine wisdom to us that sometimes will show up in our own lives. like the Tao Te Ching has shown up in mine. So, the Warring States period is a lot like 21st century Trump period in America, I believe. The division, the conflict, the potential for violence, and the incredible, and by incredible I mean unbelievable, and yet very widely believed idea. The incredible idea that violence actually can make things better. Having grown up in the 20th century, I know that a lot of the movies would always resort to violence as a way of fixing things, which somehow I've come to doubt just how effective violence can be. But some people have deeper faith in violence than in reason, deeper faith in violence than conversation, deeper faith in the effectiveness of power over than to power to understand, to care, to listen, to wait, to think things through. This is a hard time for many Americans. Yesterday at the No Kings protest in McHenry, there was across the street from where I was, there was a huge pickup truck, big flatbed pickup truck, so that the people on it could be above the crowd and wave their Trump flags. And I have a strong kind of identification with where they're coming from, because I grew up as a hillbilly, part of the hillbilly diaspora that moved north to work in the automobile factories during the period of social unrest and racial tensions in the 60s. And that was what I heard at the family reunions. That was the world that I grew up in, but became estranged from. So I want there to be some way for us to at least continue to work together, to persuade one another, and to turn away from violence. So, like the Tao, like water, there's a way of letting ourselves experience the Babel, experience the confusion, without trying to unify and build uniformity and impose consensus on our social existence. So I'd like to finish with just another Taoist story. The story of the man whose horse ran away. Stop me if you've all heard it 100 times. So I see some quizzes. Alan's heard it 100 times. He's used it 100 times, so that's it. Man whose horse ran away. This during the Warring States period, as the tale goes, and a man somehow the stable gate is left ajar, or the horse pushes the gate a little bit, and the horse gets out and runs away. And the man on this estate is sitting on the porch, and his neighbor, a little ways down the road, hears that his neighbor has lost a horse. So he comes over to commiserate and to comfort his neighbor, and says to the man whose horse ran away, I'm so sorry to hear that you lost this, your horse, this valuable possession, this expensive piece of property. And the man just sits and nods and rocks a little bit in his rocker and thinks about it and says, yeah, but who really knows what's good and what's bad? And the neighbor goes home, and a few days go by, and then one day the horse comes back to the corral, but with the horse is a half a dozen other horses, wild horses, that the horses encountered, and they have come along with him. And so the man who lost his horse, whose horse ran away, now has a corral full of horses. And the neighbor hears this and comes running over and says, wow, what good fortune! You now have a whole stable of horses. This is great. How wonderful. We thought this was a bad thing, but this is a great thing for you. And the man just rocks a little bit and thinks it over and says, yeah, but who really knows what's good and what's bad? A few days go by, and the man's son decides to go about taming these wild horses. And the son is trying to break one of the horses, gets up on the horse's back, and the horse rears up, and the boy is thrown from the horse, falls, and breaks his leg. The neighbor hears about it, comes over and says, oh, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. Will his bones mend? I hope he's not lame for life and all this. And the man just says, who knows what's good and what's bad? The next day, an itinerant army comes through the village where the man's estate is and conscripts all the young men of military fighting age to join their army and go into battle, and with a good chance that they'll be killed. But because the man's son has a broken leg, he's no good for them. And the neighbor hears about this, and the neighbor goes, oh, I can't believe what was such awful misfortune seems to be good fortune after all, because now your son, at least while he's healing, will not be a part of this army and will not be exposed to the danger of being conscripted for service to this marauding army. And according to the tale, the man whose horse had ran away just rocks back and forth a little bit, thinks about it, and says, yeah, but who really knows what's good and what's bad? I want to be in control. I have spent my life trying to make sure that things go well for my children, that things go well with my wife so that she can stand to live with me. I had young dreams about how I would make the world a better place, and in which I would avoid those slimy places that most people don't want to live at, me included. But slime, control, violence, Babel and confusion. Who knows what is really good and what is really bad? The world, the water in it keeps flowing. This is good news. Thank you. Oh, wait, there were two more stickers.